All right, welcome back to another episode of Phoenix Edge. This is an RPG and gaming news podcast. My name is Hat,
And I'm Eric.
And I am Stan.
and today we are going to be dissecting the Final Fantasy XVI rumor that appeared about a week or so ago on 4chan. And then we're going to be talking about Yoshi P's response to some of these leaks and some of the claims. And then we're going to be getting into a community question from Demosthenes, who asked basically, do we have any personal examples of series-defining games? So it should be a pretty good podcast this week, and we'll go ahead and jump right into it here and talk about this leak. So, I don't know, maybe a week or two ago, this leak appeared online. We were thinking about covering it before, but it looked kind of sketchy to us, and there's some other stuff for us to talk about, so we felt like we were going to kind of let this rumor settle. But then Yoshi P went and kind of talked about it, so that's our second topic. So we felt it was best to probably just go ahead and talk about the leak, and then we'll talk about Yoshi P's response as well. So basically, just to set the foundation here, the supposed leak surrounded two games. It talked about the Final Fantasy XVI announcement happening this summer, and then another game called Crimson Arbitrarium Agnes Anthology. I hope that's not what it's called because I cannot pronounce that, but that's the other game. And what the leak basically said about these games was that Final Fantasy XVI is going to be directed by Yoshi P, who's the current director of Final Fantasy XIV, if you don't know. It's going to be an open world JRPG with strategic action-based combat. Game will be a classic fantasy setting with steampunk elements. It's going to have a battle system that'll take inspiration from Final Fantasy 15 and Dark Souls, which is kind of weird. There will be a job system and also the ability to change the name of characters in order to feel more traditional. And the leak also said that it began development in 2017 on Unreal Engine 4. However, they're still debating whether to convert it to Unreal Engine 5. The game is in development for the next generation consoles with a target release date of 2022. It's a timed exclusive for the PS5. DLC will be games as service model. And then the last thing here, it'll be announced at an event this summer. Some have speculated Summer Games Fest. I think that's what the leak actually hinted at. But other people have said maybe there might be an announcement at the next Sony event. So that's the Final Fantasy 16 link. The other game, there was less stuff on there, but basically that it was being developed by the Luminous studio who developed 15, basically on the Luminous engine. And it's going to be a new action RPG set in an open world. The leak describes the combat system's reliance on elemental spells to provide strategy. It's inspired by Final Fantasy IV, Heroes of Light, and Parasite Eve. And again, it's going to be announced sometime this summer, or highly speculation that it'll be at the Summer Games Fest. So that's the leak in a nutshell. Basically, what we know about this stuff is that Yoshi P's team is working on a new fantasy-based IP. We speculated in the past that it might be Final Fantasy 16. We just learned that Capcom's Ryota Suzuki is the battle director for the game. So we know it's going to be action-oriented. Unreal Engine 5 was announced, and people are making games with it. Square strongly prefers action games. And traditionally, the next FF game is announced with the release of a new console or shortly after. And with the Crimson game, we know that there was a tech demo with the Luminous engine titled Agnes Philosophy that many believed was a concept for Final Fantasy 16. Tabata's old studio, which is the Luminous studio, was working on a new IP with the Luminous engine. And Tabata stated several times in the press that he would not be interested in working on another Final Fantasy game, and that he wanted to work on something new, and that the game he was working on was going to be something completely new. Then Tabata abruptly quit, which led a lot of people to believe that that game was Final Fantasy 16, and he didn't want to do another Final Fantasy game. And lastly, Tabata's team did work on Third Birthday, which is the third game in the Parasite Eve series, so the fact that it would be influenced by that doesn't seem completely off base. And that's the basic information we have with this. And I just want to open this up to discussion here. We do have some quotes from the actual article from, I believe, a Game Rant that kind of reported this. And there are some other places as well that we can dive into here. But basically, I mean, once we get the Yoshi P's comments, it comes a little bit clearer whether or not this is true. But based upon what we have and what you know, like, do you guys think there's any credibility to this leak? Or do you think it's just basically BS?
I think it's BS. I'm not saying these elements here couldn't be in the game.
Right.
Like, I wouldn't be surprised if they kept it to an action-based combat or anything, but all this sounds like way too accurate for its own good. And the DLC will be games as service model. I'm not sure. I'm thinking like there may have been a time where they thought to themselves, let's use the game as service model for FF16. But as you can see with FF15,
Yeah.
that didn't work out very well.
They got so much backlash.
And they just made a ton of money. Granted, it's FF7, but they re-released FF7 and they didn't add any like DLC or uh,
as far as we know, and
pay for service type of deal. Like, they haven't put anything like that in, and I doubt they will. They made the first game, now they're focusing on the second game. That doesn't make sense to make DLC for the first one. You need people to focus so much on the second one.
Yeah,
and it worked out great for them. I think people just want those single player RPGs, and I think Square Enix figured out that you can, unless it's like an actual MMO like 11 or 14, having a single player game go on this kind of service plan doesn't really work out.
At least in the way that they want to do it, right? Where they just want to cut corners with the main game and then make the production go faster because they'll remove core parts of the story, right? That's how they prefer to do it.
And I would imagine FF16 is in some form of development already.
Sure.
And they would know ahead of time which engine they're using.
Yeah.
So it would be weird if they'd been working this much on Unreal 4, then they got to convert everything to Unreal 5. Unless it's really easy to do, I doubt they'll take the time to jump from one completely different engine to another.
So that was first off, I agree with you. I think this is probably bullcrap. And I think it's the same thing. I think this person just took publicly available information and used reasonable speculation to come up with what it might be. And for that reason, it seems true in certain respects. But the red flag for me is definitely just what you said with Unreal, because the leak literally said that the game was slotted to come out the first quarter of 2022. So that means the game's coming out in about a year and a half. And they're still debating whether or not it's going to be Unreal 5. That in order to transfer a game that the size of Final Fantasy 16 to the next version of Unreal, I would imagine would take like 6 to 8 months at least. And that's them converting it to that new version and them just fixing everything that went wrong with that conversion. And just think too, Unreal 5's new. They're probably not familiar with the new layout. There's probably like hurdles with it being buggy because it's the first version that they're going to have to find workaways around. So the idea that the game's coming out in a year and a half and it's currently on Unreal 4 and it could come out in a year and a half, and then they're like, well, we might convert it, Unreal 5. Like, no, that's going to eat up the next almost year of development with them not making any more progress besides maybe like, I don't know, cutscenes or something. So that was.
If you think about it like this too, Dragon Quest XI had to jump to a different Unreal engine.
Yeah, that was Unreal 4
to be played on the Switch.
Yeah,
and that took a few years.
That was like Unreal 4.2 to 4.3.
Yeah, I was about to mention that. That wasn't even jumping to a new engine, just a different version, right?
Yeah.
Just a different
Really?
version of the
And
same
it still
engine.
took them years to get it out on the Switch.
Yeah. So I can't
Right.
imagine porting an entire AAA game that you've been working on into a next gen version of the engine. That would be unheard of, kind of, you know.
Well, and here's the other problem with that too is I believe the leak had said that the person leaking this to them was someone on the marketing team. Why would someone on the marketing team be privy to, oh, they're really on the edge whether they want to go 4 or 5, like, I mean, I guess
Right.
maybe they went out to eat with somebody for lunch and they were talking about it or something, but
It could be, but it's very unlikely.
Here's the
Yeah.
thing
Sounds like,
too.
yeah.
4chan had a bunch of FF15 rumors before it came out, and most, I believe, unless someone can call me out on one of them, I believe they were bogus.
Well, here's the thing on that. Most of them were bogus, but one of them came out 9 months before the game came out, roughly. And this person literally posted like 10 pages. And it was just like a complete breakdown of the entire plot from the beginning of the game all the way till the very ending, described the ending, and everyone thought like, this is BS. This is dumb.
Oh, I didn't think it would take 10 pages to explain 15 story.
Yeah, well, they went into like other stuff too with how the combat works and everything. But everyone looked at it and they thought, this is BS. And then we got the game and it was, every word was correct, and it came out 9 months beforehand. So that's the thing. Like every once in a while, you get something that's right. And it's just, I think it feeds that addiction for people like, oh, this might be true. This might be that one time,
This one though, like my BS meter is like running over 90% on this.
How I
particular
look at it is if it has multiple confirmed sources, I'm more inclined to believe it. But
Yeah.
I mean, it could be very well true. I'm not gonna. I have, like I said, I have as much proof that it's false that it is true. So if it ends up being true, I'll be like, huh, well, fancy that. But
I
it's
tend
just
to go ahead.
anyone can make this stuff up, and anyone can like make realistic sounding things that are happening in development. I mean, it's so easy to do that with seeing how like previous development cycles have happened. I was like, oh well, people believe it or more realistic if I put like we've had problems with this engine, so we decided to go to another engine type of deal. They're really good at making it sound true. I will give them that.
That's the thing that I think I'm with Stan and you guys on is that it started like red flag with me is just the times where the leak was specific. It was specific on publicly available information. We know that Luminous Studio is working on a mystery RPG. We know that. We know that Yoshi P Studio is working on a game. We know that. That's true. We know that these games are probably coming out on the next console. So it's like they're using information that's, Unreal 5 was just announced. Let's throw that on there. They're using information that's publicly available to be the sound specific. But when they start talking about the game itself, it starts getting really, really vague. Oh, it's an action oriented battle system with strategic elements. Okay. That's probably accurate, so it's just, it's too vague in the wrong areas. Where you see leaks that end up being true, they're like the one I was talking about where it's just pages and it's super detailed. It seems clear that the person knew what was going on. But again, you've seen leaks like that too, where somebody just treated it like a fan fiction hour and wrote out, what they wanted to happen in the Final Fantasy VII remake. So it's one of those things.
There's things in this specific leak that like you can. It feels like whoever created it is trying to fill in gaps in knowledge that we currently have with speculation and then passing it off as true. Like, oh, there's some things in here that just don't add up. Like, the leaker is claiming that the game, that FF16 will be timed exclusive for PS5 coming out in 2022. But we know from a few months ago, the Square Enix CEO, remember in an investors meeting, he said that it was all their games were going to be cross-gen, like for the foreseeable future. Like all the games they're developing are in development cross-gen. You know.
Right. I could see that particular part doesn't necessarily get me though, because I gotta imagine there'll be certain games that aren't, and 2022, if PS5 comes out in 2020, late 2020, 2022, they could get away with, well, that's 2 years after, even though that's not really, it's a year after, but
It's silly in general to exclude the Xbox crowd for Final Fantasy when both sides of the table, the console definitely, Final Fantasy definitely sells on both sides. Definitely more on Sony's side, but it does sell a decent amount on the other side also. It could be silly to do a timed exclusive, and unless Sony offered something they just couldn't refuse. That
well,
one just doesn't sound believable either.
I mean,
Yeah.
I guess to me, I look at it like, just like you said, Eric, most of the copies are going to sell on the PS5. That's probably where the most of their money's going to come in. So if Sony says, make it a time exclusive and we'll cut the percentage that we take off every game, if 80% of their sales are coming from the PS5, I mean, I think they would take that in a heartbeat, you know?
Yeah, that's usually what happens is they get an incentive from Sony to do that.
Well, here's a crazy thing too, is we don't know who's going to win the console race this time. PS5 could make a screw up again and be like, priced at $599 US, like the PS3. And then there's like the 360, which is more appealing console based on price and everything. And Microsoft could pull a fast one on Sony. And for some reason, Xbox is winning the race again. And then Square Enix is like, crap. We can't sell on that console now. I feel like timed exclusives right now, unless you're a smaller company, not like a bread and butter franchise like Final Fantasy. I feel like executives would wait and see how the console race is going before deciding something like that. Smaller IPs definitely sure. Like I don't know, think of any smaller Square IP. And yeah, definitely. But Final Fantasy itself, that one's a hard sell to convince me.
Yeah.
Anything's possible, but I don't see it.
For sure.
Yeah. There's a few other things though besides that exclusivity claim in here. Like it says it'll be an open world JRPG, right? But then also says later on it's using Unreal Engine 4, which from what we understand, Unreal Engine 4 is not necessarily the engine of choice if you're trying to make a vast open world type of game. And they have Luminous engine in-house, right?
Which they specifically designed to make open world games.
Open world RPGs, yeah. So I would assume, wouldn't it be much, much cheaper if you decided from planning, like, okay, this game's going to be open world, and then, like, you've got your own very expensive engine that you so far have only made one game for, right? Why would you why would you use Unreal Engine 4? Now, for Final Fantasy VII Remake, it made more sense, especially since that first game is not really an open world style RPG, right? And then you need to build on what you've made in that game for the other parts, right? So in that sense, it makes sense, like, to use Unreal Engine 4 for the first game, and then just keep using Unreal Engine moving forward, you know, for those games, because you've built all the assets in that environment, you know. But if you're going to start off with like a new game completely from scratch and you're going to make it open world, like, why would you use Unreal Engine 4 as your foundation? Like, that doesn't really add up. So
I agree with you, and I think that basically when I look at this, and there's probably a few other things I want to bring up here, but just looking at this from a bird's eye view. The Yoshi P or the Final Fantasy 16 thing, I think they completely made that up. But I do think that the Luminous Studio game is probably Final Fantasy 16 because that's a AAA game, right? And that's apparently an expensive engine to make games on. They're not going to spend that much money on a new IP. It's going to be Final Fantasy 16. Okay. So,
thought you're making nature documentaries with it.
well, maybe that's why Tabata quit too. I don't know. I will to bring that up also though. Tabata publicly stated multiple times. Well, here, I'm gonna bring this up later because I know the next part we're going to transition into is who do we think is going to direct this thing. But regardless, as far as the rumor goes, I think the only other thing I saw that kind of stood out to me was for Final Fantasy 16, they said they were going to let you name your own characters. Maybe, but I have a hard time with that. I could see one character, and that would still be kind of weird, but maybe they could. Go ahead.
Final Fantasy X situation where you could
No.
name Titus whatever you want, and then you couldn't refer to him by his name.
Or maybe they have a system where they can make names. You'd be like, I have fallen in love with you, David.
Dude, I would
Please
just
hug me.
I would just abandon Final Fantasy if they did that. That would be worse than Mass Effect Andromeda with those just terrible facial. That would just be like so bad.
Yeah.
That was one of the worst things they did for 10. A fully voice acted game, and they decided to make the main character like have his name at the beginning. It's like right when that final scene with like Titus and everything, and like before he goes, I just wanted someone to say, did anyone get his name? Oh my god, no one asked his name.
I always just called him you. Yeah. Well, they can get it. I think they can get away with it with one character though, but to name the entire cast like that, they can't just. You have to be able to call people by a specific name for us to know who you're talking about. What if like 4 of them are standing next to each other? Is the game just going to be like, "Hey, you there," and we don't know which cast member they're talking to until later in the game? I mean, they have to. That's silly. That's just silly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I think that alone makes it not believable because they haven't done it since 10. Well, 11 you can name your character, but there was no voice acting there.
Right.
And 14, but there's specific reasons why the single player RPGs have been Vaughn, Lightning, and Noctis's name are called.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Stan, did you have anything else in there that you wanted to bring up about the rumors, the validity, or?
I mean, the last thing is it just says the battle system will take inspiration from FF15 and Dark Souls.
That's quite the hybrid.
Almost nothing alike, and it really feels like the leaker was just like, "Oh, people know and like Dark Souls, So just throw that in there and see what people say or like run with, It's like Dark Souls has become like everything gets compared to it, right? To an obnoxious degree.
Yeah.
At this point, it's like the Dark Souls of whatever.
No, I can see Square Enix making a Dark Souls like game.
Sure.
But I don't think it's the mainline Final Fantasy.
No.
If anything, I would further believe that it's Naoki Yoshida's next game, which we'll get to in the next topic. But I would further believe that being a Dark Souls inspired game before this one.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, they just threw 2 random things together, though.
Yeah, it's just too much stuff that doesn't add up, and then
like
top it off with a Dark Souls sprinkling, on there.
If FF16 doesn't go back to basics in any way, then I do think that they'll take some inspiration from FF7 somehow.
The remake, you mean, right?
Yeah, to some extent. What I'm hoping is they look at FF10 too and be like, hey, that combat system worked really well. Let's put in this one and make improvements.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. So who do you guys think is going to Well, I guess we can save that part for the next part because we actually got some information with Yoshi P actually commenting on directing this game. But just to skip to, when do you guys think Square's going to announce Final Fantasy 16 since they're leaking? This leak supposedly says Summer Games Fest, but other people have speculated the Sony event that's coming up to show off the Final Fantasy, or excuse me, PlayStation 5. Do you guys see there being an announcement this year for Final Fantasy 16?
I think it's definitely more than possible. FF7 remakes out now, and they've done all the marketing for that.
Yeah.
So remember Kingdom Hearts 3 that came out? Once that marketing is done, all of a sudden the FF7 remake information started showing up.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is kind of like the trend they're doing, unless they have some other major IP that they want to show off next, which I can't think on top of my head. I think Final Fantasy 16 is next. I think it'll either be announced this summer or announced sometime in the fall. But
Yeah.
my bet's more in the summer.
See, I would not be surprised. I know you guys were kind of iffy on this, but I do think that there's a possibility that Sony could show off Final Fantasy 16 as kind of a collab, not a collab thing, but just basically, hey, you want to see some of the third-party support that we're going to have for the PlayStation 5? Check this out. And just show a 30-second trailer with Final Fantasy 16. Because
they did announce their reschedule for the PS5 announcement. Small news. This Thursday.
Yeah. Well,
so there might be more stuff to talk about next Monday.
Final Fantasy 16, right? But the reason I think that it's possible is because if you're showing off a new console, you want to show the next generation. And nobody can make trailers like Square Enix. And I think they just want some flashy, good trailers to get people excited. And I could just see that happening. If Square has been working on this game for any length of time, well, Square is Square. They might have just started working on it in like March, and they'll still throw a trailer together. They'll be like, yeah, we'll make a trailer.
They'll still announce it 4 years early. That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, we got this Post-it note on the fridge. Let's make a trailer based off this. You know?
Now they did show the first actual gameplay trailer for Final Fantasy VII Remake on their State of Play. Like the other stuff we saw before that was just like concepts of what the game may be, and then we got like the actual game footage in their State of Play. So it's definitely, I mean, it's more than possible that Final Fantasy or some big Square Enix title could be shown this Thursday if Sony is going to show anything worthwhile. But most PS5 related announcements have been kind of disappointing. Just him talking about what the system can do instead of just, showing the goods.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm optimistic for this Thursday. This time they sound like they really want to show something off.
So let's say that there is an announcement of the game. Yoshi P went ahead and said that in the next topic that basically he claims he's not directing it, which we can talk about here shortly. But who do you think would direct the game?
For FF16?
I have basically the way I'm looking at this is initially I thought that it was probably going to be Yoshi P just because it was so popular, and I could see Square kind of caving to that, and I think he'd be a great pick. The other person I was thinking was Hiroki Ito, just because he has not been doing anything but small stuff, and his business division hasn't really released anything, although they've consolidated. And the brand manager for Final Fantasy in 2013, Hashimoto, was asked about Hiroki Ito and what he was working on, and he just laughed and said he's putting ideas together. Now, he could have just been like, whatever, but it's possible that he's working on something, but I really think they're going to slap Nomura on this, because we found out that Nomura is not working on 7 Remake Part 2, and Kingdom Hearts 3 is done, and Nomura is kind of their guy right now. And Final Fantasy 16 is a big property. They could stick somebody no name on there, but I just don't see them doing that. I think they'll stick Nomura on there, and if they've been working on the game at all, Nomura's going to come in and just be like, I don't like any of this.
Well, there's a 80% chance he's doing the character design.
I think he's going to direct it.
I think it entirely depends on who directs it, because
if it's not Yoshi P, I don't know. It's got to be Hiroki Ito or Nomura. It could be Toriyama, but I just don't see them giving him a game by himself again.
If it's anyone from 13 and 15, I can guarantee you Tetsuya Nomura is going to do all the designs. If it's anyone else, then you have possibilities like Akihiko Yoshida doing the character design and stuff like that.
But as far as like leading the project, I would see Tabata, but Tabata left.
It's hard to say. It would be great if like Matsuno just came out of the curtains and be like, guess who's back?
See, but I feel like some of that old guard has just been out of the director's chair for too long. Like video games have changed so much that it just would not be the same. Like they would be making a PlayStation 2 game on a PlayStation 5.
Yeah.
Whoever it is, I can't really think on top of my head, but I really hope that it's someone who has an extreme passion for the Final Fantasy series and like has a very strong understanding of the core fundamentals of what makes Final Fantasy a great series like it is. And I do not feel like Tabata really understood that. And if you read his interviews, he just sounded like he did not even care to understand that. He's like, I played Final Fantasy 2 once.
He said he fell asleep on the couch playing it, and that's the only one he's ever played. Yeah. Well, no, you know who would be a perfect person, and this can maybe carry us to this next topic here, is Naoki Yoshida, commonly known as Yoshi P. And there's been a lot of rumors like the last leak that we just kind of, I feel pretty comfortable saying we kind of debunked it, but there could be some truth in there. But Yoshi P was the center of a lot of conversation lately that people wanted him to direct Final Fantasy 16. And there was this game that was showcased on Square's website, and they only showed an image, but it looked very Final Fantasy-esque, and it was being created by Yoshi P's studio. And so naturally, people connected Yoshi P's studio with Yoshi P and this new game looking Final Fantasy, and they connected it, and they have Final Fantasy 16. This is very reasonable. We actually did the same thing. We have a video talking about that where we're kind of giving analyzation. There's another kind of associated image with it that has like an airship type thing, but it's a little bit more stylistically a little bit different. But regardless, a lot of speculation that this was going to be Final Fantasy 16 and that Yoshi P was directing it. And during a Final Fantasy 14 premiere stream on YouTube, Yoshida was asked about Final Fantasy 16 in the chat, and he replied using the official Final Fantasy 14 YouTube account. So he literally replied in the chat, and he said, looks some kind of big fake news came out. I'll say it clearly, it's annoying. He then goes on to say, I'm still going to continue being in charge of Final Fantasy 14 for more years to come, as long as I don't die from sickness or accident. So please ignore any non-official announcements. It's so bothersome.
I can believe him just because I've been following him since the very day he began being the director and producer of FF14. And he has gone on to say that it's a very tiring job, because the thing is with this type of game, with its worldwide appeal, he constantly has to go out, do interviews, do these fan fests, make these frequent visits and everything like that. I cannot imagine how he does all the development for 14 itself, which is still monumental to do with all his expansions and all of that. and direct 16.
Mhm.
That is a very tall order for one man. Now, granted, there was a time he said there may be a point in his FF14 career where he may give the director role to someone else and he sticks to the producer role. But I still think it might be a little too early for that.
Mm.
Well,
I think he would have made some announcement or said something, or maybe he's keeping hush if he is lying and he is the director for 16. But as we were saying, man, it really feels like he's the only ideal choice
yeah.
at that company, unless there's some like outstanding person we've just never heard of
Well,
come out of the spotlight.
here's the
They
thing.
I
Here's
was just gonna say they burned through all their other good directors. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
here's the thing. When I look at this, I can based upon like look, I've already said that I think Final Fantasy 16 is the Luminous Studio project, and that's not related to Yoshi P. He doesn't have any experience with that engine. I'm not saying he couldn't handle it or anything, but it seems like to me they would just promote somebody that already worked on Final Fantasy 15, or they would just bring in somebody as a more creative force like Nomura, and then they would have somebody else co-direct the game that is familiar with the engine. And but regardless from that, if we wanted to say this game that they're working on is Final Fantasy 16, I could still see us kind of wiggling through his words here because it's possible that he was just trying to be careful with his words. And if he just said, like, he never actually said he's not working on Final Fantasy 16, he just said that he was going to continue working on Final Fantasy 14. So, and he said, please look forward to any official Square announcements. So, if you want to read into that, you could say that if he were to simply say he's not working on Final Fantasy 16, that could imply someone else is working on Final Fantasy 16, and thus the game is in development. And maybe that's why he didn't say specifically that he's not working on it, but it leaves that window of speculation open that he didn't deny it either, you know? But it
Here's
seems
another
to me he implied that he is not working on the game.
Here's
Yeah.
another thing to take account, though. He is technically on the board.
So he
So
would know.
so if he feels that there is a like lack of quality control over Final Fantasy 16, he would clearly come and say something. Like the board doesn't
What he
like necessarily um like give the executive commands, but they will tell like the CEO like this is not working. Like this is the quality of this is absolutely terrible. Like you should do something about this. And then the CEO has to act by going to the executive producer, and then the executive producer goes to the director and be like, "Fix your crap."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I would imagine that he would only see updates every 3 or 4 months, at a meeting, right? Where they might show some footage and like a presentation or something. And I imagine it depends on who's working on it. If you have some no-name guy that's got promoted to director role, maybe he's done some small stuff or she's done some small stuff, then maybe that might hold some weight. But if it's Tetsuya Nomura directing Final Fantasy 16, Nomura's just going to ignore him.
Right.
Like Nomura's going to be like, what are you going to do? Fire me? You're not going to fire me. Like I created Kingdom Hearts and like I directed Final Fantasy VII Remake, that was
The
pretty.
three of them where it has to do like a colossal, like company almost goes bankrupt thing to get kicked out. Like Hiromichi Tanaka, who I would have thought may have been a contender,
Mhm.
but he's not with the company anymore. He's the one who produced FF14 1.0, and that became a disaster and put Square Enix in the red. And then he conveniently took a leave of absence due to health and no longer worked for the company anymore. So
Yeah.
Square Enix is not above getting rid of people,
Right.
what I see, allegedly.
Mm-hmm.
But Nomura is a hard one because you can get rid of a background man, but Nomura is kind of like a celebrity in
I mean,
in Square Enix.
yeah, because of Kingdom Hearts, essentially, right? He's the goose that laid the golden egg for them. So
Yeah, and on
Right.
top of that,
Nomura could just
Gucci didn't get fired; he left the company.
he was demoted essentially to a less important position.
well,
So
he
they
was like
they gave him a choice between boredom or leaving and doing your own thing.
well, yeah, he was taking a more business role for the company, like a business direction, and they just demoted him to basically the Final Fantasy guy. Like,
Yeah. Like the brand manager essentially, right? Who doesn't have like a lot of creative input, I think, is the issue.
well,
Right.
I think I don't know. I think he would have like creative input in the games, but he wouldn't be able to
Make
like
any
if they
serious
wanted to make a sequel
decisions.
or
Yeah.
something, like he wouldn't be like he would just have to execute the sequel, like they said, or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Well, Eric, I just want to ask you this. So, if Final Fantasy 16 and Yoshi P is not the director of this game, whatever this game is, and this is something Stan was asking, if there's somebody else, is there somebody else on the Final Fantasy 14 team that you're aware of that could possibly get a shot at Final Fantasy 16, or do you think the people that you're aware of are just not far enough in their career to be given that kind of shot?
Not on the director seat, but in terms of a writer, the Shadowbringers writer, I forgot her name. I would need to look her up real quick. Shadowbringers writer, Natsuko Ishikawa, absolutely beautiful writer. She did the Dark Knight Quest job storyline, and she did the Shadowbringers, and that is some of the best writing I've ever seen come from this company in years. And like she knows just how to hit the right notes with you. But that's like writing. But in music, like Masayoshi Soken, maybe he's only done FF14. He hasn't done like another mainline FF, so I might. Um,
But you think, as far as like director goes, it's just pretty much Yoshi P right now?
yeah, there's not really anyone else. Like a lot of the other directive creative roles are people who've been working on both 11 and 14.
Right. Didn't they have the director of Final Fantasy 11? That individual, I can't remember his name, but he directed Final Fantasy 14, the original, and that one flopped. And then he got demoted to like co-director.
He's like kind of like assistant director or something like that.
Right. Like he helps. I don't know. They didn't want to embarrass him too much. Basically, I don't know. But
I think his name's Mizuki Ito.
well, regardless, I can't see them giving. If that guy just totally botched the original Final Fantasy 14, I can't see them giving that guy, hey, you want to do Final Fantasy 16? You know, I could see maybe they might say, you know what, you've been working under Yoshi P for this long. You did well with Final Fantasy 11. Let's get Yoshi P on Final Fantasy 16, and you can manage Final Fantasy 14 now that there's 2 expansions and a large foundation. You can handle the server direction, like getting like the holiday stuff out and all that stuff. But we're not letting you create your own game.
I do think if it's not Naoki Yoshida, I think it's going to be someone we've never heard of. If they want to go in a more creative direction with 16,
yeah,
I think they're going to hire someone new to take the director spot and maybe get someone familiar to take the producer role. So they feel like they're kind of in the safe place right here. Let the director do what he wants, but like the producer slap his hand if he goes off like in the wrong direction or something. I don't know, but it would be pretty cool to get someone brand new in.
I think
Assuming they do really well.
I think what they're going to do is basically, because breakdown here, Tabata said many times, many times, and several interviews that he did not ever want to work on another Final Fantasy game. Not because he hated Final Fantasy. It's just that Final Fantasy 15 was so much work. He said he got 4 hours of sleep every night for 3 years. You can see the creases under his eyes. The guy worked his butt off, and he said it was just awful, the amount of work that and stress that it was. And he just was like, I want to make my own IP. And then he gets his own project with this AAA new engine, right? Luminous engine, which is what they use for Final Fantasy 15. And he's happy. He's like, yeah, I'm making my own game. And they've done this to him before where he thinks he's making his own game with Type 0. And then they come in and say, well, actually, it's a Final Fantasy game. So I think that they came in and said, well, no, this is expensive. It's going to be Final Fantasy 16. And he quit. So I think what they're doing now is I think they're going to pull in Nomura, and they're going to do the same thing they did with 7 Remake, where they propped up Hamaguchi to be co-director. And Hamaguchi was somebody that most of us has never really heard of. He's been with the company, but he hasn't done anything too big. But he ended up co-directing Final Fantasy VII Remake with Nomura and Toriyama. And now Hamaguchi is going to direct Remake Part 2. I think they're going to do the same thing with Final Fantasy 16, where they're going to have Nomura direct Final Fantasy 16. Nomura's getting old, and they're going to have somebody that's familiar within the Luminous Studio engine, and they're going to prop one of those people up, and then that person is going to be directing Final Fantasy 17. But they're going to have they need to start propping people up, and I think that's what they're thinking about. Nomura's like 46. I mean, he can only do one or two more games. So he's going to be the figurehead to prop somebody else up.
Miyamoto's in his 60s, and he's still producing games just fine.
Yeah, but I'm sure they're worried about it. Like, they're like, who's going to direct our games if these people retire?
Nomura lives off the tears of Kingdom Hearts fans. He's fine.
Yeah, I don't know.
To clarify something, I know I've said in the past that bringing an experienced director may be a bad idea for a mainline franchise, but I'm kind of turning around on that a little bit. Certainly not someone like Tabata who has little understanding of FF before going into it, but like a Naoki Yoshida, like 14 was his first director producer role, and he was someone extremely passionate about the series and had a good head on his shoulders, so it made him a natural director for that. So if they have another person like that in the company, give them the director's chair, I say. But you are right. I think Nomura, if I had to guess based on the knowledge we have, Nomura is definitely a top contender. And that's a little scary.
Yep.
Because of the crazy, weird stuff he likes to do. It's like if FF7 Remake, not spoiling it, is just any indication, and Kingdom Hearts especially, he will go off the walls, off the rails.
You know, it could be a badass team though, because they like doing this co-director stuff, right? What if they had Nomura and then they had Matsuno? I wonder what that game would look like. Dude, it would probably be crazy.
It's two complete different ideologies.
It would be fantastic. It would be like the flashiest Final Fantasy Tactics we've ever seen. It would be amazing.
Either that or the story would be very subdued and political, and then
convoluted.
All of a sudden you'd be like, oh, there it is. There's the Nomura chapter. Here we go, right?
Yeah, that's probably true. But dude, I would be kind of excited to play that. I'd be like, I've never played that before. I don't know what this is going to be like.
I can tell you, Nomura doesn't often create like medieval fantasy type characters very often. So if he gets the director's chair, like very likely this is going to be like another future, like modern futuristic, like Final Fantasy. Which
for those that are listening that are probably not maybe don't know some of these names, Matsuno, he did Final Fantasy Tactics. He directed Final Fantasy. Well, he did Vagrant Story 2, right? And then he did Final Fantasy 12, part of it before he kind of
Had to
took him.
step down.
Had to step down. And then Hiroki Ito, which we brought up, he directed Final Fantasy IX with Sakaguchi, and then he also assisted with Final Fantasy 12, and he assisted with Final Fantasy 6. And so he's another person that they could bring out as a figurehead. So those are where those people came from. And Tabata was Crisis Core, Type 0, Final Fantasy 15, and I think Third Birthday was another game that he did, but that's not really the same ballpark. But yeah, that's the context for some of those names. And Yoshi P's Final Fantasy 14. So, yeah. So I don't know. Do you guys think that it's possible this game could be the Yoshi P studio game? Do you think it's possible this could be
It could be a cover up because Naoki Yoshida is a very vocal person, both online interviews, everything. Like he says a lot what's on his mind, and he could be on a very hush hush type deal. Like you are not allowed to tell people that you're working on this game. So if people ask you, you say no or don't answer them. And someone probably just asked them right there on the spot.
Yeah.
And he was like, no, don't listen to what they're telling you, for the sake of he's not supposed to say anything. So, and he can get away with it too.
Well, he didn't.
It comes up and it says Naoki Yoshida, director or something. I mean, so it's still entirely within the realm of possibility. But my only argument is that he does so much for 14. It would be hard to mix 16 in there also.
Yeah. I can't. Yeah. I just keep going back to this quote though, because he doesn't say anything about Final Fantasy 16. Even though the person asks about it, he says, looks like some kind of big fake news came, which I guess that's kind of saying that's not true, right? But I'll say it clearly. It's annoying. Then he says, I'm still going to continue being in charge of Final Fantasy 14 for more years to come. So please ignore any non-official announcements. It's so bothersome. He doesn't.
Man is good with his words.
He didn't say I'm not working on Final Fantasy 16. He was just, I mean, I guess he kind of did when he said it's big fake news. It's kind of.
He might not even be able to say the words Final Fantasy 16 though, since the company has not announced that that is even a thing yet.
Dude, it's the Luminous game though. It has to be. That's the only thing. Like I can read into these words all day, but I just know that's what that game is. I can't imagine Square spending that much money on just a brand new IP.
Yeah, but he may have. I'm just saying he may have had to structure his words in a way that doesn't use Final Fantasy 16 in the statement, right? Because he may not even be able to say that, because if he does come out and say, I'm not directing Final Fantasy 16, right?
That means somebody is.
Yeah, then the news is Final Fantasy 16 is happening, right?
Which we all know. Yeah,
but he can't even confirm that, so he has to structure it and say just, there was some fake news that came out, Yeah. So
I enjoy that
I'm with you though. He didn't. I don't think he necessarily denied it. What he said was, "Don't believe anything that's not official from the company," and then just said, "I'm gonna still be in charge of FF14."
Here's another thing too. If he was dead serious about it, that I don't do your thing, he would. I've seen his interviews before. He will tell you straight out no. Mm-hmm. Like he can say, he could clearly say no. I am not involved with any other projects except 14 and this new IP coming up.
Do you guys think? Yeah. Do you guys think that it's possible? Because I'm still in the camp that the Luminous game is Final Fantasy 16. This game that they're working on, it seems pretty Final Fantasy to me from the little bit that we've seen, though. So I wonder, is it possible that it could just be a spin-off Final Fantasy game? Maybe it's a mobile Final Fantasy game, or a cell phone Final Fantasy game or something like that.
No, they've already confirmed in the article it's a AAA game.
Oh, okay. I guess I forgot that then.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. And we have the Capcom's guy, Ryota Suzuki, who is going to be in charge of the combat. That's right.
Yeah, it says he was just hired in 2019.
So I highly doubt they brought that guy over to work on a mobile game.
Probably not.
damn heavy mobile game.
Expensive.
He is credited for helping do battle direction in Devil May Cry 5, which is a critically acclaimed game for its stellar action gameplay. So this is a man who has a very strong understanding of action combat.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, they're poaching all of Capcom's battle people because
it could be a Switch game, right?
I doubt it.
I don't know, unlikely.
I think 16 is going to be a PS5 game.
No, I don't. If this is not Final Fantasy
No,
16,
I didn't mean 16.
Oh.
I meant this game.
oh,
I'm very sure it's going to be a PS5 title.
because I'm thinking of like Astral Chain or something like that. You know, something 15 to 20 hours, very stylized. This guy really refines the combat.
Well, looking at the picture, it definitely looks like it's a Final Fantasy game in some form.
Mhm.
Even if it doesn't officially say Final Fantasy on it, similar to Bravely Default.
Right.
Like, I do think that it's going to be inspired by Final Fantasy to some extent.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you with that. Like, that's my speculation here. If it's not Final Fantasy 16, I think that it's probably going to have the words Final Fantasy in the title. You know.
And if he's involved, it could be like a Dragon's Dogma or a Witcher type game or Dark Souls type of game. It could be something like that. If this is like a new thing that they're trying.
Do you think it could have Final Fantasy 15 mixed with Dark Souls combat?
Well, Dark Souls has actual player agency, so no.
I was just referring back to that leak in our first. Yeah. Anyways.
That would be cool though.
It was a deep cut.
To have like an actual good open world game that's like Final Fantasy inspired.
What about that game that Hideo Baba was working on that came to Square Enix that they said they closed down the game? Project Prelude Rune. It had a somewhat cel-shaded look that kind of looks like this image with the airship and stuff. Maybe they just repositioned that game to this studio.
I think that game is gone. And
with that crappy animations.
I think at most, they may use some ideas from it for another game.
Yeah.
They do. The companies do actually do that a lot, like cancel titles, but keep the ideas intact for like another possible game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's about all I have. Do you guys, Stan, you got something? You got something lingering that you wanted to say that?
No. Well, it's interesting because this guy that they have to do the battle direction for this game, FF16 or whatever it's going to turn out to be, Ryota Suzuki.
Like we totally goofed his name up. Yeah.
We did the he did the Devil May Cry battle system from the most recent Devil May Cry game, right? Devil May Cry 5.
Right.
But I believe he's credited for 3 and 5.
Yeah.
Not sure. I think 4 also. 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, but he was also, there was another Capcom guy, Teruyuki Endo, who was the battle director for Final Fantasy VII Remake, where they hired him to come over and help with the battle system. And he was the one who did Monster Hunter World, which, was very popular and very successful. So it's like Square Enix is just like poaching Capcom's people right now. They're just like looking for what games are selling and what the gamers are responding to, what's popular, especially like in the West. Monster Hunter World sold better here than any previous Monster Hunter game, and Devil May Cry 5 also did very well. So they're probably looking at that and, saying like, hey, we're trying to appeal more to the West, like, and a broad market in general, with like action combat. So why not just hire the people who are having the most success with that, from a Japanese development standpoint?
Makes me think it might be closer to a Dragon's Dogma type game, just because he actually helped do battle direction for that also. And I will say, for some faults it's a great game, Dragon's Dogma, But definitely one of the things I can definitely credit is the combat, which is actually really fun.
Mm.
You can even do crazy things like climb on a monster, like get on his back and start stabbing him in the back, or get up on the back of a winged creature and fly up in the air. Like there's some cool stuff like that. So if they add some elements like that into a Final Fantasy game or this new IP, I mean,
Yeah.
um, that would be pretty wicked.
Yeah.
Yeah. The specific article that you sent me about this guy joining the team, though, Eric, is from Dual Shockers, and I just want to real quick just kind of cap this with this quote from Ryota, who says, "This is my own way of seeing things, but I believe Square Enix's objective can be summed up as such: keeping our position as the first representatives of Japanese RPGs, striving to obtain the position of first representatives of Japanese action games." So, I mean, it seems like he's all in, and it seems like some of what you're saying, Eric, might be on point. So they're trying to take that branding and bringing in all these people that are well known, but positioning themselves as the new leaders in, Japanese action games. So
Is it? Do you guys find it weird that he brings up command-based games? Like, why would he feel the need to say that if this is just going to be a whole new IP or
Straight action game? Yeah.
for context, he says, this is Ryota, he says, "I may be exaggerating, but nowadays many believe that Command RPG itself is old-fashioned. These games are called JRPGs outside Japan, and older players will play them, but the younger generation raised playing Grand Theft Auto first-person games aren't used to command-based battle systems. They feel weird seeing a system where the enemies and allies will simply stand as they wait for commands. Square Enix still deem RPGs as important, though. We plan to make games for those who enjoyed our works until now, and for the younger players who are more used to action games." It's kind of weird that he feels the need to bring that up.
Yeah. That makes me think it's not going to be like a straight Dark Souls game or style, like whatever he's working on. But
Square Enix, for some reason, just wants the best of both worlds. They want RPG and they want action at the same time, perfectly balanced. And you can't have that. It has to be one way or the other.
Yeah.
Like when they tried the FF7, while this is definitely a step in the right direction, there's way too much micromanaging for an action game.
Yeah.
So you kind of had this like weird mixture. It ended up pretty okay, definitely better than 15 for sure. But I don't think they've just nailed that balance yet. Like to even Kingdom Hearts credit, it knows it's an action game first with RPG elements added to it, and that might be the same mindset here. But if they're hiring him to come up with a way to have RPG and action coincide, come like 50-50, I think they may be disappointed. I think he'll make a heavier action title
Yeah.
than RPG.
Yeah. I mean, Square to me in general, when it comes to their RPGs, they seem very reluctant. It almost seems like they make turn-based elements when they do because they feel like they have to. But if they felt confident their games would sell and be action-based, I think that's the route they would prefer to go. So I guess it is what it is. We do have a Discord question though. Maybe we should transition to that. We have from Demosthenes, who says, "Long-running game series often have entries that fans will choose that represent everything they enjoy about the series, such as Ocarina of Time not only becoming a genre-defining title in its generation, but also for standing the test of time and remaining an enjoyable game to play. So the question is, do you guys have any personal examples of series-defining games?"
Well, I know he mentioned Ocarina of Time already, so I'll use the alternative. Mario 64 was a series-defining game.
I can see that.
Yeah, not only within its own within its own series, just from 3D adventure games in general. All take inspiration from Mario 64 to an extent. And what was so great about it is that it fully evolved the Mario series without cutting away the core fundamentals of what makes Mario a great game to begin with. And you can say the same thing about Zelda. It converted itself to 3D, but kept in, for the most part, what people love about Zelda: the exploration, the going into dungeons, finding the new items. They just made them just so vast and expansive right there, like you're going on this epic adventure, both games. And ever since then, it's like there hasn't been a new form that's truly defined that. And I think the closest to do that is Breath of the Wild.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for Mario, it's kind of like that was the first 3D game, right? And Mario, Mario 64, right? It was the first 3D Mario game, and the 3D Mario games afterwards have added to it, but it's like a lot of it is still those core fundamental, 3D platforming um, systems that they put in place with that first game. So I could definitely see that. Like it's kind of like the template, right? And then you add things to that. So um,
So with series defining though, like, okay, Ocarina of Time is great, but do you prefer that game over Breath of the Wild?
You're kind of, I feel like, more asking for different things from it.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost a different genre. It's hard, right?
Well, do you think future Zelda games will go back to the Ocarina of Time like kind of mindset, or do you think it's going to continue going the Breath of the Wild
I think
mindset?
so.
Because
I think Breath of the Wild made a great foundation for itself, but I think the biggest criticism the game has is that there is a lack of dungeons in the game, and the only ones that are in there are very lackluster, except Hyrule Castle. Amazing dungeon, absolutely beautifully made dungeon. And I think I think they need to mix the best of both worlds. I think there needs to be a stronger narrative for
okay,
3D Zelda fans, while still keeping that open, explore, go any direction you want. And I think how you do it is like you start the game off like similar to Breath of the Wild, where you learn your stuff, and then you go out and you learn. For some reason, you have to go to these 8 dungeons to get the items you need to go to the final dungeon.
okay,
Say now, every time, and you can go in any direction you want, and you can go to that. You can either go to the fire dungeon or you can go to the shadow dungeon first. And every time you beat a dungeon, the world around you gets harder, but newer weapons and equipment and more powerful stuff starts dropping also for the balance. So you do that kind of counterbalance right there.
okay. So
So I think that brings a little best. And let's say you complete 4 dungeons, like you have a new narrative that opens up for you to go to sort of keep that narration going for people who like the 3D Zelda type games. And honestly, each dungeon should be like an open dungeon similar to Hyrule Castle. I've thought a lot about this.
I can tell.
And
I can-
I've listened to a lot of reviewers also. So it's kind of like just like mix and matching a
right.
whole bunch of stuff people have said.
Well, I
But
mean, but in those are like I think that would make an excellent direction to go. But when I think of series defining, when people talk about Breath of the Wild, they talk about that being a genre defining game or this generation defining game because for a lot of people, it changed the way they approached open world games. So, in a manner of speaking, it was defining in some ways. It's just on one hand, I know that Ocarina of Time is a fan favorite, but it's almost like I personally feel that going forward, Nintendo is going to take the Breath of the Wild model and just kind of expand upon that more so because it's gotten so much critical acclaim. However, I know it's Nintendo and they like to do different crap every time, right? So
I absolutely agree with you. 100%. The reason I go to Ocarina of Time first over Breath of the Wild is because it's so much easier to explain Ocarina of Time. And explaining Breath of the Wild is a lot more complex on what makes it series defining because you have to take a lot of the history of direction that like Zelda's gone in. Like Skyward Sword is probably the most extreme extent on Zelda becoming a more linear experience.
mm,
And Breath of the Wild is just the dead opposite of that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like a big open explorable world. Like it's like everyone complained that Skyward Sword was too linear, and then like they're like, "Oh yeah, we'll show them. We'll make such a big world map, and they won't ever be able to explore everything except that asshole Eric who 100% it."
Yeah. I've heard rumors that with Breath of the Wild, there's nothing that's limited at all at the start. Once you leave the first plateau, there's nothing that's limited. There's a way to get to anywhere, even if you don't have the stamina. So, like, while you might not think you can climb a mountain, you can climb that mountain and get to the top. But it's going to take you're going to have to find like different routes and stuff. But there's basically that there's no place that you can see that you can't get to at the beginning of the game with enough effort. I don't know if that's true because
The only thing you can't do right away in Zelda is getting the Master Sword. You can go straight to the Master Sword if you want, but you have to complete other content to get
so
it.
that's the only stopgap then. Okay.
Yeah, then like there is like as soon as you get off that plateau, you can go straight to Hyrule Castle and take down Ganon.
Interesting.
Mm,
That is a kind of a cool design.
Yeah,
Stan, go ahead.
Hmm.
Well, no,
I'm
Eric, go ahead. You want to finish up?
done. I'm done. I'll talk all night if I keep going.
Well, Stan, what do you got for do you have a series defining game that you want to bring up?
It's kind of hard to say because I feel like to say a series defining game, like
Pac-Man
it's kind of like,
or something crazy? Yeah.
yeah, like, is it a genre defining game? Does it like come out and it's like super popular and like the fundamentals of it kind of like are carried forward in the rest of the genre or the series? Because I feel like a lot of people would say like FF7 is a genre defining game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it popularized a an entire genre of game, the JRPG. I would say the same thing about like Street Fighter 2,
Wow,
right?
that's in my
Like
head too.
yeah, totally launched like 2D fighting games like into the mainstream. Like it was crazy back then, like when arcades were still around, like those places were just packed with people playing those fighting games, mostly because of Street Fighter and what it did. But for I almost feel like it's harder to pick out like a specific game within only its series, right?
Sure. Especially the longer running series.
Yeah, so I have a question for Eric. Like, would you consider like Dragon Quest 5 or 8 like a series defining
Can
games
there
for
can there be
those?
multiple series defining games?
Yeah, because like those are the ones that are cited as kind of the highest quality, right? Of like when people suggest like, oh, I've never played a Dragon Quest game, which one should I play? It's usually like 5 or 8 that pop up in those conversations as like to start with, maybe 3
Series
also, but
defining is so broad term.
yeah, it's
It
hard to
could be
say.
for multiple reasons. Like you said for FF7, that like it was its story, its new cinematography,
Hmm.
its approach to 3D is just what made it series defining within its series. It has a place to call itself. Like if I say something like Dragon Quest V, I could say it is series defining because of its powerful story. Um, you know, it represents the evolution of the series without taking away the fundamentals of what makes it great.
Yeah.
That it stands out more. It's kind of harder to say. I would sooner say Dragon Quest VIII for that, but
I mean, you can look
I
at
don't
it
know.
in subsets, right? So Dragon Quest V might be the definitive game to play from that era,
The 2D.
the
GQ.
2D era, right?
Yeah.
But once you get into the 3D era, it's got a different feel. It's got different, it's just a different experience. Similar,
Mhm.
but different. So maybe in that realm, you might have to contend between, I really like Dragon Quest 11, but I think Dragon Quest 8 was a little bit better, or vice versa,
Mhm.
I,
It's hard to point out Dragon Quest because each game is spectacular in its own right. Series defining is like it's like something that defines what makes the best of that series. Like
well,
it represents the best of the core values of the game. So when you think of like Final Fantasy, I think of like Final Fantasy 9. That's
mhm,
like series defining because it just represents everything I love about Final Fantasy in one package. I can't say that about 15 or 13
Yeah.
or anything like that. I don't believe they hold true the fundamentals of what makes Final Fantasy the series as great, at least as it was. Um,
right. For
so
for me,
that's kind of how I
but
see it.
yeah. I mean, Demosthenes, she does say that this is basically long-running game series often have entries that fans will choose that represent everything they enjoy about the series, and that's where Ocarina of Time came up. So, I mean, for me, I do agree with you, Eric. I think that for me personally, although I really like Final Fantasy VII, I think that game is an excellent game. I think some people might prefer the premise of that game or the setting of that game. For me personally, Final Fantasy IX is just a game that I think will just appeal to most people. And I think it's a game that just does almost everything really well. So, with every Final Fantasy outside of Final Fantasy IX, I kind of, when somebody asks me if I would recommend it, I kind of like take a moment and like pause and think like what type of person this is that's playing this game, right?
Mhm.
If they're really into dialogue and stuff like that, I'm not going to recommend they start with Final Fantasy X. Well, yeah, maybe don't play that one. You might like it, but play some other ones, right? Or
Mhm.
if they really are like hardcore into graphics, well, Final Fantasy VII isn't the first step forward with the PlayStation graphics. I think that Final Fantasy IX's graphics hold up beautifully because they still make games that look like that today. For the most part, I mean, it's aged a little bit, but it looks great. It's playable to current generations. Whereas Final Fantasy VII, it's kind of difficult. That's why they're remaking the game, end quotes, remake. But
I mean, you turned that Moguri mod on FF9 PC. You could say that was a really good double A
game,
modern FF title.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's, if anybody doesn't know, there's the Magurma. How do you say it? Magurmi? I don't know.
Moguri mod.
Yeah, so it's a mod for Steam, the Steam version of the game, and it does the AI upscaling. And basically, the problem with the PlayStation era Final Fantasy games is they have these pre-rendered backgrounds, and they looked great on the PlayStation, but with these remasters, they're only remastering the characters, but they're not remastering the backgrounds. So you have these HD characters running on basically 480p backgrounds, and it basically looks like the backgrounds are flat paintings that the characters are running on now, whereas on the
Mhm.
PlayStation it looked like a 3D city. So the reason Square hasn't done that work to those pre-rendered backgrounds is because every background for every area is another like JPEG file, basically, and it would be a lot of work, and they feel like people are going to buy it anyways. This AI is actually running through, and it's a mod, and it runs through and automatically like upscales the background. And they just came out with the 8th version for Final Fantasy IX, and it looks fabulous. It almost
ridiculously good. Like Square Enix should be embarrassed by what this group of people have done.
yeah.
Like you can even go into
Well,
settings
anyways, yeah.
and change the frames per second on battles to make them feel faster without having to hit a fast forward button. And it's just absolutely amazing. Like I can't recommend that enough. If you have the PC version of 9 or thinking of playing 9, I would probably look into that and see if that's something you're willing to try out, because I think that is the I know we like to throw this word around lately, the definitive version of that game.
Yep.
Just to go off on a tangent.
Yep. But I think it was a pretty good discussion. Does anybody have anything else they want to bring up here? We forgot to do the mystery character and stuff like that, so we can do that here if you guys don't have anything else to say with this question.
Yeah, I had a few more that I'd throw out just as a maybe
Okay.
this is a series defining game, but
Okay.
Mass Effect 2.
Yeah, I figured that would come up.
A lot of people cite that one as like the most solid of those games, you know.
Represents the best of the series.
Yeah. And then maybe even Kingdom Hearts 2, although I'm not a Kingdom Hearts person, but that's often cited as like
the fan favorite.
Yeah, even a lot of the more hardcore like speedrunner people, you know, are like, yeah, Kingdom Hearts 2 is like the most interesting of the games. And then this one is, I don't know, Star Ocean 2, but I think that might be just the fact that it's the game's quality is much better than than all the other games in the.
Here's how you do series defining. All right, so we've all played some Mario RPGs to an extent, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is everyone's favorite Mario RPG?
Super Mario RPG.
Yeah, same.
I mean, I've played one Paper Mario game, so it's not fair, but I feel really confident with that answer.
When people play Paper Mario or Mario and Luigi, who have great foundations in their own right, always wish they bring a little bit of Super Mario RPG back to the game. And like more like it's like unique storytelling and stuff like that. You're not just fighting Bowser this time, you're fighting someone new.
Right.
Stuff like that. And people love that, like about the later Paper Marios and the Mario and Luigi games and stuff like that. So, but series defining is like if you say like a series, like you think in your head immediately, like, oh, yeah, that's definitely the best one. That's the one people like.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
there's some good picks, definitely. All right, let's move on here to the mystery character here, so we can we need to wrap this up. Let's see here. So last week we actually got somebody that guessed the character right. I'm gonna go ahead and put that on the screen here. Give me 1 second. Stan, who was our character last week?
It was Ophelia from Octopath Traveler, and
boom.
CarQuest Camaro was the person who guessed it correctly.
So basically how this works is we have a new character. Right now it's basically every week, but we want people to guess who the new character is. And if you get the game right, you get the character right, we're going to document that, and it's going to help put your name in the hat for how many votes you get towards the game that we are going to discuss in a spoiler fashion next. So if you've guessed the character right every week, you're going to have more votes than somebody that's only guessed once. If you participate at all and you get the character correct, you get a vote. But if you get it right the first time, you get 2 votes. So if you're the first one to get it right, you get 2 votes. And we're keeping track of this in a big Excel spreadsheet. And we've been talking amongst ourselves about games, and we are very close to having a list of games that we are going to present to you all sometime in the future. We're still working out which one specifically, but we've refined it down. We had a list of like 30 something games. I think we got it down to maybe like 18, and now we're whittling it down to like 6. So we're getting there. But this new character for this week is right here on the screen. So if you believe you know who this character is, go ahead and leave a comment in the comment of this video. And if you believe that you got it, but somebody else beat you to it, go ahead and leave the comment as well, because that's still going to count as a point.
Yeah.
And while you're looking at this character, trying to figure out who this character is, I just want to bring up also that we are media partners with RPG Fan. And if you are not familiar with them, they have a website, rpgfan.com. They've been in the business since the late 90s. And they do mainly reviews, but they also have features and they have other podcasts. They're starting to promote their own YouTube channel some more, and where they're doing video reviews. I've actually been able to assist with that process, but we strongly urge you to go check them out. They have a great YouTube channel, RPG Fan. Just Google them. They'll come right up. And then their website, rpgfan.com. There's reviews on there, Twitch streams, just all sorts of stuff. They have a forum, their own Discord server, like the works. Very, very busy over there at RPG Fan. Really appreciate being able to be media partners with them, and we really want to urge you guys to go check them out. I think their most recent review is Bug Fables, from what we saw recently, which actually got a 90%. So that's pretty good. So
I do actually want to try that. It's very Paper Mario like.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to play the new Paper Mario next month. So
yeah,
that might convince me to do it.
Yeah, there you go. So go check them out. As far as our own channel, though, we are a RPG podcast, and we try to do game discussions where we go super in depth with spoilers and just, spend 2 hours or however long it takes to discuss a game in detail. And we've discussed a numerous amounts of games in the past. So we did a 3-part Final Fantasy VII Remake discussion. We did a Crisis Core discussion. We discussed the original Final Fantasy VII. We also did, for our first time for our podcast, almost, 2.5 years ago, Final Fantasy 15. We did Final Fantasy 13, Xenoblade Chronicles, Dragon Quest 11, Dragon Quest 5, Kingdom Hearts 3, Knights of the Old Republic, and Chrono Trigger. And whoever takes part in our mystery character game here, you will be able to vote on the next game that we play. So I think that about wraps us up this week. Let's get us back on the screen here. And I really want to say I appreciate everyone checking us out. We're kind of working through some of the slow news and some upbeats, but we really appreciate everyone checking us out. And we should be back next week, hopefully with maybe some Final Fantasy 16 news. Maybe, right?
We'll see.
At the Sony event. But
there'll be at least something to talk about.
Yeah, something. But we will check you out all next week. Thank you, guys.
Take care.